week I've been doing this, so
Yeah, it's a really cool platform.
yeah. Stefan, I think we're live now.
Cool.
Yeah. Stefan, for those who don't know who you are, and what your company does, could you tell the audience about Flo Bio?
Yeah, so Flo Bio is a wearable kind of consumer company. So we developed a sensor. Here's kind of a design prototype of it. So it's a rather small unit, kind of slightly smaller than, say, a watch face of like your Garmin or Polar. And essentially what we're doing is we're building the interface to understanding the human body at a molecular level in real time. That's really the kind of the grand objective. The initial product is going to be focused at prosumer athletes. So these are people who train 7+ hours a week. And it's going to be doing hydration sensing. So we're going to be sensing through sweat your electrolytes, so your sodium, potassium, pH, and your sweat rate. So we can calculate from there your total body fluid loss. So the idea is that we give you as an individual or an athlete a full picture of your hydration status in real time.
It's really interesting. I mean, well, what was the original story? And why did you develop something like this? I mean, I can't imagine somebody developing something like this and not being an athlete or interested in sports somehow.
Yeah. So actually, Giovanni and we met at Entrepreneur First. So that's they call themselves a talent investor. It's a pretty unique environment where they don't invest in companies; they invest in individuals with the expectation that those individuals go on to create companies together.
Yeah.
So Giovanni and he's my co-founder and CTO. We met kind of before the EF cohort kicked off, and we met over a shared interest of understanding the body in real time. From my perspective, I'm, apart from also being like a founder, I'm also a pretty avid athlete. I kind of worked my way up from complete noob, doing breast crawl, all the way up to Dutch Ironman national champion in 2018 for my age group.
Okay.
So I've always had an interest in, if you understand the body and if you start to play around with parameters and kind of not biohacking to like the definition of the sense, but like biohacking light, you can actually get the performance out of your body. So I was really interested in understanding like, how can you optimize for performance, for mood, for energy, et cetera, by understanding what's going on in your body? And he was interested in the technical side of being able to do that. So initially we were looking at an idea which was completely different to Flo Bio, which was real-time coaching. So audio-based coaching, because we both agreed that kind of voice interface is the future of interfaces. You want to kind of apply that interface where it makes most sense. So in some scenarios, screen interfaces are still the best interface. In some where you want to be hands-free for safety reasons or whatever, you want to have voice interface. So we went down that rabbit hole for around 2 weeks, did a bunch of customer interviews, did a very early stage test of the service, but found out that it wasn't really like scratching an itch. It wasn't really solving a pressing need. So we went back to the drawing board and essentially tried to figure out, well, from the conversations we've had, from the research we've done, what shared problem did all of these athletes face? And one thing was, I have no clue how to use sports supplements. I have no clue how to dosage or how, even if electrolytes are useful. So we kind of opened up that discovery and found out that some people, they'll pay £1,000 to go do a human performance lab test where they literally test everything under the sun. And other people never had that chance or the financial means, so they know that they want to do it, but they just can't. And that's currently the only way really to get a really good understanding of your body. It's in labs. So Gio, his PhD was in building biomedical devices and getting really, really sensitive signals from the human body. So like muscle signals or heart rhythm or brain signals. So he went to the drawing board and essentially said, look, we can create a non-invasive approach which gets some of these analytes from the human body through sweat. And that's kind of where one thing led to another. And yeah, here we are today.
That's really interesting. What insights can sweat provide us? I mean, hydration, but like, could you peel the onion back a bit? What insights can we understand about hydration itself?
Okay, so sweat is it's a wonderful bodily fluid from a hardware perspective, because it's a byproduct of blood plasma. So if you look at the biology of a sweat gland, it's directly connected to veins. So what this means is that things that you can sample in a blood test, there will be very small traces present in sweat. So, sodium, potassium, lactic acid, glucose, cortisol, cytokines for inflammation. It's just an incredibly rich bodily fluid. The issue is because they're present in very small traces, you need to have incredibly sensitive sensors to pick those up. And that's kind of the specialty of Giovanni. It's developing miniaturized biomedical devices with high sensitivity sensors. So really, yes, we're starting with hydration because it's the lowest hanging fruit. I mean, when you're building a startup, you always need to balance two worlds. One is what would be amazing to build and what's going to become like an incredible $100 billion+ opportunity, and what's feasible in the next 6 to 12 month horizon. Because especially now with the I would say funding environment that we're going into, the economic situation that all of us are going into, I don't think you're going to be able to raise tens of millions of dollars on a scientific study. I think investors are really going to want to see an aggressive go-to-market strategy, which is why we basically went to go with hydration, because hydration from a technical perspective is the closest to market ready. The next kind of inline roadmap is glucose and cortisol. That's more kind of Gen 2 of the device, which is probably in 2 years' time. But yeah, hydration for us was a combination of user requirements. So like the market was telling us this would be awesome. And from a hardware perspective, what can we actually feasibly get to market quickly? Because you're always playing a game as a startup, which is trying to do as much as is feasibly possible in the shortest time frame, to then get to the next funding milestone or significant company milestone, get the funding to then be able to enable the next 1 or 2 milestones. So that's essentially why we chose integration. But yeah, I'd say we're a kind of a design or product driven company rather than sales driven. So from our perspective, the decisions are all based on what the market and users are telling us. And in most conversations, I'd say 70% of the time, hydration was the thing that was constantly coming up.
I mean, in an optimistic world, let's just say 12 to 18 months time, what do you hope your device can provide athletes, and what insights or real-time insights do you think, or do you hope athletes can ascertain from your device? Yeah, I mean, because I think I was watching Shark Tank a couple of years ago, and Mark Cuban, he runs a basketball team, and he said, do you know what, eventually I hope there's a device that can map the hydration of these athletes, and then we can provide them with supplements in real time during each quarter. That still doesn't happen right now. I mean, do you hope to eventually get there?
Yeah. So, I'll ping Mark after this call. No, that's exactly. So what we're currently working towards. So our next milestone internally is in a late October, early November pilot. So we have a couple of Olympic teams, Team GB Olympic teams, international football teams, some Premier League winning football teams, elite Olympians, et cetera. So we have a list of pro teams who are all signed up, who are going to be kind of supporting and piloting the device. And essentially what we're telling them, and that's kind of the first iteration of both software hardware, is the device is going to tell your athletes after a session their sodium loss. So how much milligrams of sodium did they lose in that session, and how many liters of water did they lose? And then we're going to tell them how to recover properly after that session. And it's all going to be personalized. So it's going to be every single athlete's going to be wearing their own version of the device. It's going to have their own data. So all of the feedback is going to be personalized to that athlete in those conditions. Because say I bike today and it's it's recently rained, the humidity is slightly up, but the temperature's lower. My sweat rate might be higher than say yesterday, where the humidity was lower but the temperature was high. So every condition changes also how your body reacts and how much sweat you produce and how much sodium you lose. So this, if you're dealing on the elite level, where like literally nanoseconds in some case make the difference between podium or fourth, they are looking for every single small marginal gain. And essentially what we're calling this is it's legal doping, because essentially what you're doing is you're optimizing the athlete's individual like nutritional requirements for the demand of their exercise. So 12 to 18 months time, It's actually going to be ready for consumers. The app is going to be able to do sweat prediction. So we marry third-party data with your sweat data, so we have contextual understanding of sweat. Because the closest to market, I would say, is Gatorade's sweat patch, which essentially will tell you, after the fact, you scan your patch. It's colorimetric reading, so the photo reads kind of the change in color of the patch, and then it'll say, drink this Gatorade product. What we want to do is go a step further, and we want to understand, why did you sweat in your particular way? Why did you lose that much sodium? Give us, your Garmin and your Polar data. We will marry that. We'll track it across elevation profile, distance traveled, temperature, heart rate, all of that, so we can start to build out a predictive model of hydration requirements. And this is really why you need to have the understanding and probably the hands-on experience of an athlete, for the very simple reason: if an app tells you, we can tell you exactly what your sweat rate is. You're going to lose, after the session, you're going to lose 2 liters. So drink this up. And for the next session, tell us. We'll extract the data after the session, and then you recover properly. The issue is, if you're exercising, you want to know how much fluid you're going to need to execute for that session, and you're going to want to know how much fluid to take for that session. So it's completely pointless if an app is like, drink every 20 minutes, and then you're like, well, I have no more water left, or I have no more sweat tablets left. So it's the very small detail of, you also want to be able to provide individuals with the exact understanding of what they need to prepare and take with them. And that's the difference between an okay product and a very inherently intuitive product. And that's what we're aiming to do. So, internally, I'm probably the product's highest critic, because I'm going to be using it every single day, for 2-3 hours plus. So yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Very handy as well, and convenient. Do you think who is? You mentioned that you were your initial trials will be with football clubs and God knows what. But do you think? Who's your ideal user? Just given would it be a cyclist?
Yeah. So ideal users, honestly, are in my gut feeling right now, it's endurance athletes. So cyclists, runners. That's really, but that's because that's the world I understand. So I really know that problem inherently. But we've been speaking to a friend in the cohort. She's a ballerina, and she was saying, ballerinas train 4 hours a day. If they're semi-professional, they train 8 hours a day if they're professional. And in the ballerina industry right now, weighing is taboo, because they don't want to highlight weight of dancers because, the eating disorders within the industry. So they don't weigh their athletes. But weighing really is the only rudimentary way of understanding fluid loss, because you weigh yourself before a session and after session, and you calculate the delta, and that's probably the fluid loss. So there's a ton of industries that we just haven't thought of that pop up where this could be very relevant. So whilst as a startup, you have to focus on a beachhead and a very well-defined niche. That niche for us is endurance athletes, for sure. But we're already trying to validate other markets where the same product can satisfy needs. So that's why we're working with, football teams, rugby teams, basketball teams, et cetera, because from our perspective, we don't want to limit ourselves, one, from a market sizing, but also 2, from an impact perspective.
And the contextual impact of the contextual intelligence of the product as well, because your recommendations are going to be one way for an endurance athlete that's continuously cycling for a couple of hours a day, but then the requirements and the contextual impact and understanding of a footballer or a basketball player is going to be slightly different. So it probably allows your product to be much more well-rounded, right?
Yeah, it'll be. I think the statistical models that we'll be developing will be more tuned. That's for sure. Because the more data you have, the more kind of varying the scenarios in which the data is created, the better the models get at being able to predict. Because really, what we're developing is essentially, we're developing a software company under the guise of hardware. Because right now, the only way to get the data for the machine learning models, et cetera, is through building our own hardware interface, because there is no other way of getting this data. But really what we're looking to build is essentially the exciting thing is, none of us ever in the history of mankind have ever had a baseline of our unique glucose, our unique hydration, our unique cortisol levels. So what I mean by baseline, really simple example. My mother's side of the family, there's a lot of diabetics in her side, and they were talking about how, the glucose level at which they feel normal. For one uncle, it's 108. For another aunt, it's 89. And that's their normal. The issue is if a doctor says you need to be at 100 because that is baseline. So you at 89, you're below baseline. I'm going to shoot your insulin up. At that level, she starts to feel a bit woozy. The issue is right now, our medical baselines are all based on aggregate amounts of data, not personal data. So what we think the future of medicine is highly personalized, highly tuned, and you cannot get that right now with conventional testing methods. Because unless you physically live in a lab and are constantly having blood drawn from you, you will not get that baseline. Readings right now are always going to be point in time. And it's going to be dependent on, what you did that day, what you did that morning. If you had a huge breakfast, of course, your glucose levels are going to be up when you take a blood test. But is that your normal glucose level? I don't know. So really what we're looking to do is, because we're changing the acquisition method from a physical, fixed one to a essentially ad hoc on your body one, we're constantly getting readings. Whilst the readings might be less medically accurate, we have more data. So over time, we actually get better understanding of the body. And that's where we're going for, is we're trying to get a baseline for different analytes that we can, if you deviate north or south of baseline, you get real-time recommendations on what to do about it. And that's what we're going for.
That's really interesting. I mean, when you mentioned aggregate data and the generalized data, one tangible example is calories in and calories out. This generalized view that men should have 2,500 calories and 2,000 calories for women is I mean, I've always questioned it, because I remember doing I remember doing a triathlon and then training for the Ironman as well, and 2,500 calories for me was okay. And that was after 6 hours of training. I mean, I was okay with 2,500 and I was maintaining my weight. So I'm like, this model really doesn't make any sense at all. My sister was eating 2,000 calories a day. She put on a ton of weight.
So that's one example. It's really difficult to live a balanced life if you're essentially reading at the back of labels and you're going off of kind of guidelines, which, naturally it's better than nothing. I'm not saying guidelines are bad. The issue is for like that next level of human performance, you need precision, you need personalized accuracy. And that's really what we're looking to do. I mean, it's a really standard evolution. It's the next thing from what we've got. It's a really good, can't remember who gave the talk, but I think he just joined the EF team as a venture partner. And what he said is, all the easy problems have been solved. The problems left are the hard ones. And that inherently means that the companies are going to need more capital, more time, et cetera, because instead of solving something from one angle, you're going to have to solve it full stack. And we're a perfect example of that. We right now, in order to build the software platform that we want to build, we have to be a full stack company. We have to build the hardware interface, the software backend, the statistical models, the front end, the marketing, all of that we need to own, because that's the only way that this company can get off the ground. So it's a very interesting, phase that we're going into, I think, in terms of startups. It's the harder challenges are the ones that are left to be solved, which honestly, it's an exciting thing, because they tend to be the really like, holy shit, if you can pull that off, take my money. And that's really the difference that we saw between working on kind of the audio coach and this. It's the amount of interest we have now in what we're building is 100x that of what we had when we were building the swim coach, because this is actually oh my God, this is something completely different that we just don't have right now. And this is kind of what I tell founders. So part of something that I do on the side is I'm involved with Work Incubator, which is one of the universities I studied at, kind of a program designed to help students get off the ground and, get their first startup off the ground. And I think one thing that we're now changing in the program is we're stressing a lot on idea generation and validation, and kind of just being incredibly ruthless with validating, does this really need to exist? Like if you build it and you take it away from a company, the difference of they'll send you a nasty email, or they're going to come on to your house and bang on the door and demand for the product back. Like that's really, I think, where founders now need to spend their time. It's build something where if you remove it from the market, you'll literally have like death threats to return it back to the market. And I think that's what you want. Like, building a company is already hard enough. It's not easy, you know, it's a very stressful experience, but it's so much easier if you're actually building something people care about.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the questions I had was, what sample size do you kind of need to get to in order to kind of come? What sample size what sample size do you need to get to in order to get accurate and reliable insights about your audience or your users?
So the interesting thing with sweat, and specifically like sweat rate and sodium loss, there is no gold standard. So unlike other products where you might want to work with like the elite for example, resting heart rate, way back when they were developing heart rate zones and they were developing, you know, what's a good resting heart rate, they would probably go to Usain Bolt type people and strap a heart rate monitor to them and try and figure out what their resting heart rate is. And that is now the gold standard for a good resting heart rate. And then you can start to create, you know, rulers, et cetera, around where other people might lie on that chart. For sweat rate, it's highly personalized. I might have a higher sweat rate than Usain Bolt. Doesn't mean that I'm fitter or less fit. Naturally, obviously, I'm less fit. But it doesn't at all mean anything like it's a good or bad thing. It's just my sweat rate. So for our particular like bodily fluid and analyte, we're doing a sample size. So the initial pilot is going to be around 100 athletes. That for us should be sufficient to be able to develop the first version of the statistical model, which will give good predictive based hydration kind of requirements and needs. I think the more important challenge is actually how do you create a model and algorithm which, using contextual data, so temperature, elevation profile, heart rate, weight, all of that, how that actually determines a better predictive model.
Interesting, yeah.
So that's really where the challenge is. And for that, one of our advisors, he's ex-US military. He's a doctor who created the algorithms for US military troop and field hydration requirements. So we're kind of building out our auxiliary expertise team as well, of people who can help on like every single kind of different part of the company. And that's what I meant by like deep tech full stack. We have to do essentially these biomedical algorithms. We have to do the hardware. We have to do the design, all of that. So we don't internally have all of the skills. We're putting together a team that does.
That's interesting. I mean, you've been on this journey with EF for the last couple of 6 months? Has it been?
4.5.
4.5. What have you learned about business building itself? I mean, have there been any humbling moments?
Yeah, I mean, so this is the fourth time that I'm building a company, and every single time you learn something new. I think two very humbling moments. One was at the point of pivot, where we were kind of at an inflection point between the swimming idea and this idea. It was actually my girlfriend who we were out on a run, and she'd seen that Gio and we were kind of struggling to get the interest that we were looking to get from the market and from our customer interviews. And she was like, honestly, Stefan, you know, you need to make a choice whether in 3 months' time, when you're at investment committee and, you know, you pass or fail, whether you're happy with the fact that you are either pursuing the swimming idea or the fact that you're building a company. Like, what do you care about more, the idea or the company building aspect? Because if it's the company building aspect, you need to break away from the idea. You need to like lose that emotional and personal connection that you have, and you need to pursue something that's a bit more relevant. So from my perspective, that was the first humbling thing, which was, you know, an idea, even though it's yours, doesn't mean it's a good one. And even though you might have done like 7,000 hours of training and you thought during those 7,000 hours, this would be a good thing, doesn't mean that it deserves to exist. So that was really the first thing, is like, you need to break away. You need to have less of an emotional connection to your ideas, because it could eventually be the downfall of you. So that was one. The second humbling moment was, so EF have they've developed an incredibly good like tried and trusted process of building investable companies. And to do that, they have at a midway point between the program, they have Super Check-in. So Super Check-in is the precursor to the investment committee, where you pitch to the venture partners and senior members of the EF team, who essentially have the debit card. So at Super Check-in, we went in pretty confident about ourselves. You know, we'd gotten, I think at that time it was like 3 pilots. We recruited a microfluidic kind of engineer who could help us design one part of the product. We got one incredibly good science advisor. We had Tim Don, who's a world elite triathlete who currently holds the world Ironman record for the fastest Ironman. So we were like, okay, we've done a pretty good job so far. And at Super Check-In, we had, we were dragged through the mud. It was not a pleasant experience whatsoever. And I admit, like, for the week or so after, probably 10 days, I lost all confidence in both like my abilities and in the company. And it was a really difficult period where you had to kind of pick up the pieces and build yourself up again. And the humbling moment there was, feedback honestly is a gift, and you can choose to take it two ways, as either like a personal like attack, or as someone genuinely wanting the best for you, or at least wanting to see the company succeed and telling you where you need to improve in order to like get successful fundraising. So that for me was like the next thing of you need to not see like every single criticism of what you guys have done as a like criticism of yourself, rather a point of improvement for, the next phase of where you should focus your energy. So yeah, I'd say those were two very, career humbling moments. I think in general, like building a company, you're going to have a lot of setbacks and a lot of critique. So it's just not sustainable if you take everything so personally, because otherwise it's a very long road to burnout. So yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. In terms of yourself as a company right now, I mean, we're arriving towards the end of the interview now. So, I mean, could you just show the your device or your patch?
Yes. So this is the patch. So it's essentially two parts. So this is the reusable electronics and the microfluidic patch. These are design prototypes, so they're non-functional. Yeah. To give you a better idea, like of the actual dimensions. So the patch is incredibly thin. It's like hairline. And then the sensor is the thicker part, because that contains like the battery, the electronics for sending signals, etc. But the form factor is this one. So it's a very small device which sits on your arm or kind of underneath your forearm, and it sticks with like a medical adhesive. So I don't know if you can see that. So essentially, the device right now, like as I mentioned earlier, the next phase for us is, so we just closed our pre-seed. We're now, we hired a software engineer who was actually my old co-founder in previous companies. So he's going to be heading up product from a software perspective. We just put out an offer for a chemical engineer who's built these sensors in the past. So yeah, we were slowly building up like the core team that's going to execute kind of first functional product. And then from there, we aim to do a Kickstarter or Indiegogo early next year, to demonstrate at Demo Day in March next year consumer demand and feasibility of the product, because we built it and we've tested it with world-class athletes.
Amazing. I mean, so are you guys still taking on beta users or alpha users right now?
Yeah, so we've actually got we have kind of what we call the first 50 program. So we've severely discounted the product for the first 50 who essentially get dibs on the device when it's ready, as well as a bit of swag and kind of internal access to both team and product. So we're still taking a couple, I think, pre-orders there, but we're not taking any more pilots. So we've kind of maxed out on the professional community side. So unfortunately, for any other pro team out there right now, drop me a line if you're interested. But we don't have capacity to take on more teams. But yeah, we have some capacity to take on consumers, because that to us is very important, to have a very close touch with the consumer prosumer market.
Amazing. And where can they find that?
If you go to flowbio.com, it'll probably pop up on the bottom right, like join the first 50. And if you can't find it, just ping me at Stefan at flow-bio.com.
Amazing. Stefan, thank you so much for being on our morning show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
All right. Take care.
All right, Chet. Appreciate it. Bye. Have a good one.